So thanks everybody for joining us today. This is Allie Orwig with the Indiana Rural Health Association. We really appreciate you joining us, and we especially appreciate Jim Boyer. He's the CIO at Rush Memorial Hospital, a longtime friend and partner of the Indiana Rural Health Association, and he has been so kind as to come on and share his expertise in cybersecurity with us today. So Jim, I'm going to go ahead and turn it on over to you.
Yes, good morning and thank you everybody, and very honored to be able to present this to everybody. I've shown this to a couple groups in the past, and I think the biggest question I get a lot of times is, what keeps me up at night? And of course, cybersecurity is always one of those things, amongst a few other things. But looking at cybersecurity and putting my head around it, there's so many spokes to the wheel, which gets everybody paranoid for the most part. Am I doing the right thing? Am I not doing the right thing? So this presentation's really geared for providers, CEOs, other C-levels, IT directors, anybody that's just trying to get an insight on how to manage cybersecurity in their organization, and really what pillars to look at and where you should be spending your monies overall as you transition maybe from older cybersecurity methodologies to the new. A lot of times it's all about cost shifting. Of course, with cybersecurity, there's always going to be an increase in spend, but this presentation is really geared to kind of really simplify what I've learned over the course of time, what I've implemented here at Rush Memorial Hospital, and just all the things that can not only keep you safe, but helps with your cyber liability insurance and things of that nature, processes and governance and whatnot. So I'll go ahead and get started. Get my slide to move here. There we go. So you're going to see a lot of memes in this presentation, so feel free to laugh. This is what that's all about. I think humor really builds those endorphins to help people learn a little bit more, especially when you get presented with the boredom of cybersecurity, as complex as it is. So, simplify, that's the biggest thing. How do you simplify cybersecurity? And as you can see here, as we communicate, not only just in communication overall, but really, how do we take a very complex topic and try to simplify it for an organization? So, security assessments. So as I go through the presentation, each slide or each group's going to kind of go into that pillar of what you should be looking at technically. So the security assessment and pen testing is one of those ways to have a third party. I recommend you don't do this yourself, but there's many groups out there, which I'm sure you're familiar with or partnered with, which is Pondurance, Purdue, Sterling Group. There's many others in Indiana. Basically provides the gap analysis to show the strengths and weaknesses of your network and security practices. Depending on what you're trying to meet, most people try to meet just the bare necessity HIPAA. I strongly suggest going towards more of the high trust or NIST standards. NIST is the most popular one out there. Discovers internal, external entry points to the network. So when you're looking for that assessment and pen testing, you want internal and external. So you want to be able to do your internal assessment, but you also want them to be able to look at your external pen testing. You really want to pay that, whoever's doing your security assessments, let's say with Pondurance, to do a pen test or try to get into your network. So they have to play as the actor to see what they can get into. Identify the high and low risk vulnerabilities. So you're going to have a report at the end of the day that identifies the high and low risk vulnerabilities. So you get it from a third party neutral that's really going to be able to clarify what they found and what you really need to do to fix those. They will test and identify the vulnerabilities that hackers would use to get in your network. So, they're going to test a lot of the, so what they'll do is they'll come in, they'll do a vulnerability test, they'll look at what those vulnerability tests are, and they'll see if they could breach certain things on your network. So a lot of testing, but identifying as well. And then your investments that you currently have. So antivirus is a thing of the past, EDR is a thing of the future, but your endpoint, your firewalls, sensors, different things, if you have network access control, those are things that they're really going to stress to see how they can break them in a sense. And it provides the evidence to support IT investments or improve network security. So as you have these assessments, it helps the IT leaders be able to work with their vendors to figure out what type of solutions they can put in place to help mitigate. So it's all about cost, of course. Another one you're going to have, and most everybody is up to standard on this, but policies and procedures is a big one, because if you ever do get hit with a ransomware attack or any attack, you know, one of the things, not only from the cyber liability side, but from the forensic side, you know, they're going to ask questions on, well, how do you do this? What is your policy? What is your procedure? Because maybe the policies and procedures are correct. You did everything appropriate, but at the end of the day, if there was a breach, you're probably going to have to change something in a policy or procedure. So, of course, who gets access to what? You know, they need to engage employees. I think the big one is they need to be realistic and serve not only the HIPAA, but the NIST standards as well. And the reason I say that is if you make it too complex, it's just very difficult to follow. So I always say, you know, it has to be, as you're writing these things, engage employees, get the buy-in, because if you don't have the buy-in, it's going to be very hard to follow those policies or procedures. Partnering with an MSSP or an MDR, so managed security services provider, or managed detection and response service. So a little bit of a difference there. So a managed security services provider is going to basically look at your logs, do some basic intervention, kind of, you know, see who's logging on and off of your network, things of that nature, give you reports. Where the managed detection and response services side is somebody that's got eyes and ears on your network 24/7, meaning they have a network sensor, meaning that they are managing your endpoint devices. So if you have an endpoint detection solution, for example, Rush Memorial, we use a company called Pondurance. They have network sensor on our network that monitors north, south, east, west. We have a product called Endgame that sits on all of our endpoints. They monitor that 24/7 amongst a lot of our logs and different things like that. So if something happens at 2 in the morning, they are on top of it. They've isolated the machine, they've isolated the traffic, and we're getting the notification. So versus getting the call and saying, hey, I've got this skull and crossbones thing on my desktop, I don't know what it is, and then 3 more calls come in, and by the time you get in the office, everything is shut down. The MDR is the detection, especially the response service. They're already going to have that isolated. So when you get the call, you're going to come into the office and start working on root cause analysis to figure out how did it get in and why did it take over a machine or two. So these services are very important. We used to run on, really at the MSSP level, we have moved to MDR, and it is well worth the money. So again, they provide that security operations center as a service, proprietary technology stack for SIM included in their service price. So that SIM is that network sensor that sits on the network. And you know, when you're looking at a vendor, the biggest thing I would really caution, if they're putting a network stack or a SIM on your network, look for that stack. So it shouldn't be one technology. It should be a multitude of technologies that sit on top of each other and complement one another, because security is not about having one thing to stop it. It's about the layers in process, because a hacker will figure out what you have. You know, they're just going to come on your network, they're going to sniff around, they're going to figure out the best plan of attack. And then if they breach that one service, they're in your network. If you've got 3 walls to breach, there's going to be some alarms that go off before they more than likely get through that second barrier. Of course, 24/7 monitoring, continuous network monitoring, threat detection, triaging, and forensics analysis. So again, if those threats come in, you know, we're looking for that root cause. doing the forensics on it. Remote incident investigation and response recommendations. You know, at the end of that, they're going to give you recommendations. Say, boy, this thing got in, we've sensed it, we've seen it. Here's how you can, what you can do to prevent it. We get stuff, just little stuff, like we will install, for example, some type of remote monitoring for a system. You know, we're installing something, we're doing some testing. We'll get an alert from Pondurance, and they will say, hey, we have detected this thing on your network. It's monitoring certain things on a server, blah, blah, blah. They'll give you all the logistics. Is this something that you're aware of? Do we need to look into it further? And most of the time we're saying, no, we didn't let you know. We put this on the network and it's good to whitelist. And then the whitelist is. So we get a lot of those alerts here and there. So vulnerability assessments, they can do, so most of your MSSPs and MDRs can do your annual vulnerability, or can do vulnerability assessments, as well as your annual security assessments. You know, it helps with regulatory and compliance reporting. And again, there's security advisors who act as an extension of the customer. So it's like having another department. So if you're looking at buying a firewall, you're looking at buying network access control solutions, endpoint, instead, if you're going from your antivirus to more of endpoint detection type solutions out there, these people are a part of your team. They should be a part of your team where you can ask those questions, because they'll lead you down the right road to what you should buy and what works out there on the market. And more importantly, it does cost less to partner with an MSSP or an MDR rather than doing these things yourself. Because I've done the cost on, if you bring in a security advisor and put them on your staff and you buy all the tools and try to do it yourself versus a team, it's just it's just too costly. Continuous education, that's the other thing. If you are, for lack of better terms, not educating your staff, they are amongst your better assets to protect yourself against a lot of these threats. So you train often, put newsletters out, put all the education in your screensavers, meetings, agendas, make it a topic, wall posters, email headers, anything you can do to get the information out there is very much worth it. And the thing that I always tell everybody with your help desk, make it it's a call center, but if anybody has questions within our organization here, what we do is if it looks, smells, if you think about it, if you just don't feel comfortable about it, you can always call our help desk, bring it to our attention. We'll look through it, we'll walk through it. And it's amazing what we find a lot of times. We'll get somebody that just gets an email and they say, I didn't expect this. I don't know what this is. It just looks weird. We'll get it, dig into it, and we'll find out, yeah, it was a false positive that slipped through, and we'll go back into either our email security filter, and typically through there or through our firewall, the couple layers we have there, and we'll actually put that on our blacklist for the most part. So, so when you look at a lot of these responsibilities, it is the organization's responsibility for company data. It's just not IT. Importance of strong passwords, unauthorized software, and internet use, locking computer screens, email. I think email is the biggest one. You got to get people to think before they click. Social engineering, mobile devices, testing and simulating cybersecurity threats across the organization. So, if you use KnowBe4, if you use Mimecast, any of that, the biggest thing is test. Every now and then, we'll test end users with KnowBe4. We'll do phishing tests. We do the education. And even with our MDR, we actually run some ransomware simulators. So they're basically, it's putting bait files out and try to do the encryption. It'll try to encrypt and it'll throw a flag, and the MDR will get it. And it's rather interesting because even though it's a well-known ransomware simulation tool, they'll know what it is, and they'll say, hey, we've got the alert, we understand it was this file, it's blah blah blah. And so it's kind of fun to see if they're truly awake or not. Vendors, another headache. So vendors, you really have to ensure your BAAs are up to date. And boy, that's an argument both ways most of the time. But there has to be a mutual agreement with those vendors. Mandate and secure access to systems, two-factor authentication. Every vendor we got that gets access to our organization has two-factor authentication. They come through one proxy portal. They have a user account. That user account is only specified for those systems that they need to work on, and they have to have two-factor authentication. If there's another technician that's working on it, they have to have two-factor authentication. If any vendor that does not agree to those terms whatsoever, they have to call our help desk every time and have to be in a monitored session while they work on those systems. We don't give any gray area whatsoever to vendors. They are a biggest threat. And most of the time when you interview your vendors, they put your passwords in a spreadsheet. They keep them in a share folder somewhere. And if those technicians know that they're not going to have internet service, they migrate a lot of that stuff to a laptop. And, you know, they'll go to a public, you know, they could be at a public entity. They could be using their MiFi, and they're not in the corporate settings. So they are on the laptop. They're bringing up those username and passwords because they're a technician. They're getting in, they're getting the calls, they're mobile, and they're trying to help, especially now with COVID. A lot of people are remote, and a lot of people are dependent on those passwords to support your system. So always have Checkpoint Charlie there at the door. Make sure that they're patching and updating. So as you're patching your systems, be sure that you have in the rounding, if you have radiology equipment, if you have med pumps, if you have vital monitors, who's doing the updates, who's doing the patching. Are they HIPAA compliant? And if they are, have them prove it. A lot of people will say they're HIPAA compliant, but they can't prove it. And again, HIPAA, HITRUST, SOC 2, SOC 3 auditing procedures, do they have it? A lot of vendors I work with, they'll say, yes, we are SOC 2 or SOC 3 compliant, we're HIPAA compliant. And nowadays, before I do business with a vendor, I want to see that documentation and I want it delivered to me so I can put on file. And I expect an update, you know, every year as they go through their security assessments. I need an update as to did they meet their HIPAA or HITRUST, SOC 2 or 3, whatever level they are at. And involve it in all your IT contracts. You have the right to add that language to your contracts that they provide those types of services to you, and documentation. Medical equipment vendors, you know, same as what we were discussing before. You know, auditing, you know, even though that equipment's in-house, you should be able to do vulnerability scanning on that. So if you're going back to, hey, vendor that takes care of my medical equipment, you know, you should have things ACL'd off and segmented, but you know, do your vulnerability scans and touch those machines, and then go back to your vendor, because a lot of times they'll say, well, we can't do this, can't do that. So if they're trying to say that they are HIPAA certified and whatnot, and you know, you did a vulnerability scan and there's vulnerabilities on those systems, you can use that information to feed back to the medical equipment vendors to say, no, these devices are not compliant. They do not meet our standards on our network, and you have to get them to these standards. Sometimes they'll throw you a price tag, but a lot of times it's their fiduciary responsibility to make sure those devices are secure. VPN, segmented remote management. Like I say, a lot of people will get into the LogMeIn, BombGuard, TeamViewer. Really try to get one single solution where they come in and do what they need to do. You know, so it's, if you can't do the two-factor and things, make sure they're calling the help desk before they do a LogMeIn. Just a lot of those services are very dangerous because, again, if somebody steals that laptop, they've got all the passwords to the LogMeIn, BombGuard, things of that nature. Guess what? They're going to be able to take that information, get into your network, and do damage. So I don't recommend those things run on systems, but if they do, make sure that that service is shut off, and make sure your help desk is the only one who engages with that vendor and turns that service on to allow those connections. And then make sure that that service is off at the end of that session with that vendor. Encryption, boy, you got to encrypt it all. So you should be encrypting your workstations, your laptops, server hard drives, storage. email, auto encrypt the sensitive information. You should have rules built in your email filters to do that. A lot of people put stuff in emails and then it goes out the door and it's an oops. Well, my understanding is if, I send out unencrypted if I send PHI somewhere or sensitive data, especially EPHI, and it goes to a vendor, after the third time, they could report you. Now we've in the past have had a vendor say, hey, you sent me EPHI a couple times. I'm just letting you know. And what they're telling us is if this comes again, we've got the right to report you. So be very careful with that. A lot of people can blow the whistle, and next thing you know, you're getting a letter, which is not good. So cyber incident response plan. If you don't have one, you need one. Why do you need one? Because the day when the skull and crossbones hit all the desktops and you do not have a plan, you are going to be running around, and what you don't want to look like out of control is IT. So IT leadership as well as other positions of leadership in the organization has to follow a plan. So if it happens, whether it is, if it's ransomware, if somebody hacks the network, if there's a data leak of some sort, things to include in the plan is, the preparation, the response teams, the tools, logs, forensics, backups, know where they are. You must also have your MSSP and your MDR included, and your attorney. So, whatever attorney you use, make sure you have them a part of that plan. As a part of that plan, identification. So incident coordinator, documents, classification, notify. So, when it happens, who are you going to get involved? You need an incident coordinator, because you don't want to wake everybody and the CEO up out of bed. You want to be able to kind of get your hands around it and figure out what's going on. So it's an incident before it becomes a breach. So containment, how are you going to contain it? Secure and isolate it. You got to determine the risk, disable access, estimate the damage, change passwords. You have to have your processes in place to do that. Eradication, how did the incident occur? The vulnerability analysis, and improve your defense. Recovery, what are you going to have in the plan that shows how are you going to rebuild, validate, restore, and breach reporting if there is a breach, and how you're going to monitor that situation going forward. And then lessons learned, executive reports, and recommendations, because even after a breach of some sort or an incident, typically you're going to have lessons learned. There's going to be additional reporting to keep an eye on that, and further recommendations. Backups are the thing a lot of people do, but where are backups going? Well, number one, backups should be encrypted, and on-site, off-site, air-gapped. There's a lot of opinions on that. Cloud, air-gap solution in the cloud. You can use AWS. And what are your retention periods? Do you have a month, year? Where it's heading is, your on-site backups. Most of the threats coming in your network, people hacking, they're going to take out your backups before they ransom you. Why? Because they don't want you relying on the backups. They want to make sure they're going to get paid. So one, encrypting them is important, but having your backups air-gapped. What I mean by air-gapped is, are they totally isolated off of your network? So the backup happens, they're isolated. So if somebody gets in your network, they don't have the keys to get to those backups. And those backups are going to be your savior, because if let's say you're a small organization like Rush Memorial, and they're saying, hey, pay us $2 million to get the keys, or else we're not going to give you the keys. So what do? You either lose hundreds of thousands of dollars a day, or you pay the money, or you can restore from backup. So, you have workstation images, especially your crown jewels, which is everything on your servers, but air-gapped is really having that division. My recommendation, there's people that keep the on-site and cloud, but you really need to start pushing a lot of this to cloud. There's a lot of solutions out there now. There's backup as a service, if you haven't heard of it. but there's a lot of really cool technologies out there. We use backup as a service. We kind of pay somebody like an MDR to manage and control our backups. Even though my team still works on those backups, 2 in the morning when that backup runs and something doesn't go right, most of the time our IT folks will just deal with it in the morning. Well, you just lost that opportunity to secure your backup and make sure that the last day's worth of transactions or what have you has been backed up and taken care of. So if you're going with a managed backup as a service plan, 2 in the morning, you got somebody with eyes and ears on the backup. They're going to go in there, tweak some things, fix it, and you can sleep. And some of these new solutions are backing things up, every 4 hours, every 2 hours. But what's your retention? So the other side of that is if you're only doing a month or two, and let's say that first month your backups, have problems, or perhaps whatever invoked the ransomware or threat is still on those servers. You want to be able to have the ability to go down to the granularity of the file level to be able to scan those backups and remove the threat that caused the damage in the first place. And if, let's say that threat was so intertwined that your last backup was 2 months ago, yeah, you may take some loss, but you still have a backup versus a full loss. So, start looking at those technologies in the cloud. And if anybody that's on the call wants some recommendation on companies, I can kind of lead you down that path. Endpoint protection, this is the big one out there. A lot of people think antivirus is it. It's not. Antivirus is, putting a screen door sometimes on your house, where you get into a lot better technologies that are out there now. So if, first one on the list is really getting to that world of EDR. So the progression of endpoint security, as you've seen it here, you go from antivirus, you've got next generation antivirus, and you get into endpoint protection, and then you get next generation endpoint protection. And now we're at the point of EDR. So it is endpoint detection and response. It detects and contains security incidents and remediates endpoints to a pre-infection state. So you start getting into that AI world of systems being able to talk to other systems. So, if I have a threat on my machine and let's say something were to happen, a file started to encrypt, right? Somebody clicked on the wrong email, brought something in, now I've got my workstation encrypting. The EDR solution is going to say, no, I'm not only am I going to not let you encrypt, but every piece of network traffic coming from this device, I'm going to prevent you from going into the network. And then it goes out and it says, on this other port, I'm going to tell the EDR solution control station that I have a problem. That's where the MDR gets the notification. So all this is happening before the MDR even gets it. So they get it, they're saying, ooh, something's going on. They can come in and manage that threat for you, which is good. But the EDR will also tell the rest of the devices, hey, I had something happen here, and you can program this either way. Everything kind of firewalls off very instantaneously, or doesn't allow that traffic to run. So you can isolate things, ransomware going kind of hog wild in your network to really isolating it down to one machine. So it looks at behavior anomalies, it blocks malware and executables. It does, the biggest word you want to look at is containment. If I have something, is it going to contain it on that workstation or that server? And the other thing, it's not looking at it from a signature base. It inspects the network traffic. So every piece of network traffic going in and out of there is being analyzed for those threats, behaviors, anomalies. And if it differentiates, it can do it at a micro scale, but also lock down that machine. And again, it should be managed by your MSSP MDR. Because the problem I see a lot of times with AV is over the course of time, you have a lot of systems administrators that are constantly going in and changing things. And that's dangerous. And how well are they trained based on what they change? And typically they're just changing stuff to fix something that's been blocked or whatnot by an end user. Layers, again, layers are a big thing. Email filters, web and URL filtering. You should have some layers in your email filtering. So, what are you doing at the server level? If you're using Office 365, email security appliance, but are you using the EMS portions or the security portions that your Office 365 E3 versions and above typically will incorporate? Web and URL filtering, don't stick with just one. We use one that's on our firewalls. We use one in the cloud. They both do web and URL. Use them, because I can tell you, I see stuff that should not be allowed in one, which is blocked by another here and there. Now, sometimes there's false positives, but I'd rather be a little safer than sorry. Network traffic monitoring, again, let your MDR MSSP do this, but you want to be able to detect north, south, east, and west. Very important. There's a lot of stuff that goes on in your network, in your traffic, the traffic in that network that is just unimaginable sometimes. And we don't have the time to do it, so we pay someone to do that for us. Multi-factor authentication. So MFA, it's the big one out there. Do it for vendors, do it for end users. Access can be granted to computers by swiping a prox card, entering a PIN. You can use a smart card, face recognition in a PIN, password and a code. It's very secure. We have prox readers on all of our computers. You have to have a badge and you have to have a PIN. If you don't have either one of those, you're not getting into anything. So, we can do different levels of, we can even have multi-factor with 3 levels of security if we chose to do that for certain systems and whatnot. So very important. And if somebody needs help on that, I kind of guide them down that road too. It's very tricky to do in the organization, but I'll tell you, when you're starting to use virtual desktops, different things like that, most people are, where they can float those sessions. You're already in progression of doing that anyway. You just need to put the layer that adds the MFA into the network. The big one out there, what a lot of people don't do because everybody's on a flat network, is the NAC and segmentation. NAC is your network access control. So what it does is says, if anything's plugged into my network, I need to control what that is. So typically your domain, workstations, anything domain related, printers, stuff like that, a lot of those are going to be, as you put them on the network, are going to have that trust. You get the guy that goes into the conference room, needs internet, and plugs something that's in the wall, plugs something in. NAC will prevent them from doing anything. So they just won't get any network, or they will be put into a guest realm where they only get internet access. So anything you add to that, you have to put into a NAC policy to control what accesses your network. Segmentation's another layer, and I always tell people, think of segmentation as bubbles. So if your network, let's say printers, we'll take a simple one. You have a print server, you have people who need to print, and you have MFPs and printers across your organization. Honestly, the only thing that needs to talk between that server and those printers and those end users is printing on a certain port. And the workstations request a print job to the print server. The print server says, I'm going to take the job and I'm going to print it to your printer. So an application server or some other server that does another process or function should not even have line of sight to that print server. Your domain server and stuff, yes, for authentication and certain things, but even those ports and functions are even limited, down to DNS and whatnot from those servers, but it isolates that. And so radiology would be another one. You would say, hey, only these workstations need to talk to my domain servers, my print servers and stuff. And the reason you do this, it's, like I put in one of the bullet points, like bulkheads on a ship. If a hull is breached, if one bulkhead takes on the water, it can't affect the other bulkheads in the ship. So basically, if you had ransomware or attack on that segment of the network, that's the only place it's happening. The rest of your network is functional. So I always say, if you had, a pie and it was broken to, 32 pieces, you're getting 1/32 of the ship that's being affected, or the pie in this case. So you only have to deal with that bubble. So very important segmentation. I've been looking at a lot of vendors on this. A lot of people are doing it differently, but the world's starting to become where the NAC and segmentation are becoming one. So something you should be looking at. Governance and reporting is another. Yeah, what are you doing when it comes to the strategic alignment, value, delivery, risk management, resource management, performance management? Well, a lot of that ties into the IT governance. So, looking at your system and security reports, they always have a story. We get reports every day, and it's our first thing every day, every morning. We have to be going through our security reports because you look at them so much, you start to see the things that make you question things. And so then that becomes a team discussion. But you always want to approve adds, removes, or changes. You don't want to add something to the network without having some type of governance. You want to have the conversations. You want to make sure everybody has input. There's standards that needs to take place around that governance. Normal, major, emergent adds, removal or changes are bad if not reviewed by a focus group or committee with approvals. And I can tell you a lot of times people want to do a change in IT just to fix an issue, but then it causes more problems or it leaves a hole. And so there's hardening processes, things that go with those changes. Changes are a bad thing. I mean, they're a good thing, but they're a bad thing if you don't talk about and document what you're doing. Because our team, every time something would blow up on our network or something happens, first question I ask, and they already know it before they come to me, what changed? Well, we don't know. What did you do in the last 24 hours? What did you do in the last 48 hours? Let's go through our change approvals and go back and look, because something here may have caused it. And in summary, there's your 15 pillars of simplifying what you need to do. So we talked about security assessments and pen testing. We talked about policies and procedures, partnering with an MSSP or MDR, workforce education and testing, vendors, access and BAAs, medical equipment vendors, and patching and keeping those folks under control. The encryption, cyber incident response plan, backups, especially air-gapped backups, can't stress that enough. Endpoint protection, EDR, it's where it's at, not AV, and layers, email, web filtering, multi-layer. You can't have enough layers sometimes. I recommend 3, but that's because I like tiramisu cakes and stuff like that. But so network traffic monitoring, you don't know if you're not monitoring. So you really want to do that. Multifactor authentication, a big one, NAC and segmentation. And I apologize for the noise in the background, but they're putting emergency exits on our building, adding those. So they're going at it this morning. And governance and reporting. So a few more memes I always like to put out there, and boy, I think a lot of these have some truth. So haven't found anybody to change all their passwords to incorrect, but if you use password complexity rules within your group policies, that would never be allowed. So questions, I guess now is the time to open it up for questions.
Yeah, certainly. This is Allie Orwig again, and I want to thank you, Jim, for an excellent presentation. A lot of good information in there. If anybody does have questions this time, please feel free to use either the chat function or the Q&A function. You can reach those by hovering your mouse over the screen. Depending on which view mode you're in, it will either pop up at the top or the bottom. We'll go ahead and leave the line open for just a few minutes longer to see if any questions do come in, but I have not received any yet. Well, not seeing any, I'll just thank you again, Jim, for a great presentation. We have recorded this today, so we'll have it available on our YouTube channel soon, by the beginning of the week, I would say next week. And that will be emailed out to all of our registered attendees. So thanks everyone for your time today, and have a great Memorial Day weekend.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. Have a happy, safe Memorial Weekend.